Leadership is a loaded word. It's burdened by the multiple meanings that we give to it. The role of leadership, the stereotypes that we have in our heads, the act of leadership, the relationships we have with leaders, good and bad, their place in our society, and the wisdom that the best leaders accumulate over their lives. In many ways, the types of leaders that we have at any given moment in time reflect the state of the world and the expectations and hopes we have for our future. In this show, we talk to Mike Mears, who has accumulated a lot of wisdom, working in the CIA, from agent to head of leadership, in startups, and in running large divisions in companies like GE. We explored the leadership platitudes that he's busted in his career, driven by a relentless curiosity and eagerness to make sense of his expectations. Tune in for a fascinating conversation on The Evolving Leader.
Hi, folks. Welcome to The Evolving Leader, the show born from the belief that we need deeper, more accountable, and more human leadership to confront the world's biggest challenges. I'm Scott Allender.
And I'm John Gomes.
What are you bringing with you today, Mr. Gomes?
I'm bringing a sense of serenity and calm. I've had a really great week. I've managed to have one of those rare times where I've been able to contemplate and think and write, and it's been wonderful. Had some really great conversations with people. So I am feeling very satisfied, actually, I have to say. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling today. I'm bringing a little heaviness, a little sadness. It was a deeply difficult week personally, the last several days. But I'm also bringing a lot of gratitude for community and friendship and family and just the people in my life, which includes you, my friend, and this show, and the opportunity to have conversations like the one we're about to have. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time. Today, we're joined by Mike Mears. Mike, who has led a really extraordinary life, studied at Harvard and West Point. He was a commander of a nuclear missile site and decorated for valor as a U.S. Army combat platoon leader. He's held positions as senior vice president at GE Investments and other large organizations. He's led turnarounds and launched several startups, but what we're particularly intrigued by is his time at the CIA, where he headed the Leadership Academy and retired as its chief of human resources. He's about to launch a new book called Certainty: How Great Bosses Can Change Minds and Drive Innovation. Mike, welcome to The Evolving Leader.
Scott, thank you for having an old spy on.
I'm going to ask you about that spyness in a minute.
Mike, welcome to the show. How are you feeling today?
I am actually feeling ducky, close to maybe euphoric, because we are getting ready to talk about my obsessive subject, which is leadership, something I think about all the time, and I love talking about it. So you've got a very happy interviewee here. Now, I want to step aside, though. What an unusual question to open a podcast with, but it's absolutely brilliant. And I want to get into this later, but what you did is you did a check-in, which you talk about in your book, The Nonlinear World, Leading in the Nonlinear World. And I want to get back to later. We can talk about what does a check-in do to the human mind, when you're doing them. But that's a cool way to start.
Thank you. Well, it certainly settles us into what we're doing and gets us really focused on it. So great for calling that out.
And let's definitely come back to that. But you said something, in your greeting, which was the first on my list of questions, which, for all the ground we're going to cover today, were you in fact a spy?
Well, let's get some cheap laughs here, and I'll say, geez, Scott, if I tell you, I have to kill you. Do you know how many times I've heard that?
John, that question's from John, by the way.
That's like being a lawyer. You tell somebody you're a lawyer, and they start telling you lawyer jokes. It's like fingernails on a chalkboard. Anyway, it is true that I can't talk about it because we sign an oath. and I can hear the podcasters out, podcast land starting to tune out right now. I just say, wait a minute. I've got two things for you. The first is, if you meet me and we're in a bar or a pub, I can tell you stories that'll curl your hair. I just can't do it publicly on something recorded. So that's their guarantee. And then the second thing is, if you ask me specific questions, I can answer. Like you could ask me, Mike, where did you live in the 1980s? And I would say, well, behind the Iron Curtain. I lived in Moscow. So what I want to do is to scratch the spy itch, I want to tell you the two best books your folks ought to grab hold of if they're interested in what it's really like. And the first one is a book called The $1 Billion Spy. It takes place in Moscow in the 1980s, oddly enough. And he was, the reason it was a fellow named Tolkachev, and the reason he was called the $1 Billion Spy is he gave us everything the Russians had on aircraft, avionics, radars. It was the mother lode. And it also was their next 20 years of planned efforts. So it just doesn't get any better than that. It tells the mechanics and tradecraft of what spies do. A little dry in parts, but I'm rather surprised how much it disclosed. Now, the second book, John, centers on SIS or MI6, and stunning book called The Spy and the Traitor, about a chap named Gordievsky, who was the resident in London. And it's such an unbelievable and suspenseful story. I don't want to give it up or give it any hints, but it's like a beach read. It's so well done. So that's a keeper.
Thank you for that. I've noted both of those.
Yeah, we'll put links in the show notes for those two. And I have to say that Mike, we were in a virtual bar a few weeks ago, and did tell me some amazing stories, which I didn't write down. So nobody has to come up after me. So you start the book with a somewhat surprising encounter with your boss at the CIA that leads you on a very long journey of discovery about leadership and change. Can you tell us about that and what it unfurled in your mind?
Now I am telling a spy story, and it starts out like a bad spy novel where I'm in the bowels of CIA and my phone rings and somebody says the DDO, which is the Deputy Director of Operations, that's the spy master. They report up to the director, wants to see you right away. And he's the man or woman who really knows everything. They're read into all the cases. They're running all these operations. They know all the secrets. So you know how you get that little spike of fear when the big boss calls sometimes. And so I gave it the old, well, could you tell me what the subject is? And they said, no. He just said, get up here right away. So I went rushing up there, and he looked up to me, and he asked me a really mundane question, but it's one that I've thought about every day since. And the question was this. Why is it, Mike, when I pull the levers, nothing happens? So think about it. We got somebody in one of the most powerful positions in the world. And I knew by lever, Scott, in HR, the metrics and rewards and training are all these levers we pull. So here's somebody in one of the most powerful positions in the world, and people are not doing what the boss wants. And it just stopped me in my tracks because my title was an odd one, which was Senior Counselor for Leadership and Management. I was the guru. I knew everything. Thought I did. But I didn't know the answer to that question of what is it we're applying wrong or what is it we're applying right? And so it's a fascinating journey to sit and pick up that question every morning, flits through your mind. Everything you read or see somehow unconsciously will get linked to that question. And so you really make some breakthroughs about leadership and human nature and so forth.
What was your biggest shift in terms of how it changed your approach to leadership?
Well, I'm embarrassed to tell you this. It took me 4 or 5 years to come up with why the levers don't work is, well, boss, it's human nature. If you tell them they won't listen, and what's in their head's not in yours, and they won't tell you what's in their head. It's pretty simple. And then he probably would ask me, well, why? And I would say, well, what's your basic human instinct? And he would have said survival. And I say, yeah, it's the survival instinct. It's unconscious, but it controls fear and reward. And that's basically what it's all about. So I think once I latched on to this idea that the levers don't quite work with human nature, that was the big breakthrough, because it started me talking to neuroscientists, psychologists, so forth, about how does the human mind really work. And it was familiar to me, because here I am, basically I want to reverse engineer human nature to see what should we keep doing that we're doing in leadership world? What do we stop doing that's not effective at all? And then what new things could we do to inspire, motivate people, and so on? So it was that was the productive moment to start thinking that way.
So speaking of what's in our heads and human nature, you point out a number of ways in which our brain is still optimized for an environment that really no longer exists. So what's happening in our brains when we meet modern challenges?
Well, it's funny. Here's another quasi-spy story. I was in Innsbruck, Austria, with an old spy buddy, and we decided to jump on a train and go up to Bolzano, Italy, in the Alps there. There's a museum for somebody named Otzi. And Otzi, I don't know if you remember this, it was called the Iceman originally, was a discovery they made, two Germans made in the Alps in 93, and it was a frozen remains of a Stone Age man 5,300 years ago. So what's remarkable is, as you know, wood and clothing and leather are all decay after a couple hundred years. So we really don't know what was Stone Age life like. So this guy was completely preserved with his full kit. I mean, he had everything: his weapons, his medical kit, food, everything. And so going up there and seeing that, it's just, I would recommend it for anybody. The museum, they've got his frozen remains in a cabinet that you can look in and see, and all of his clothing and so forth. And suddenly it dawns on you, people haven't changed much in that period of time. So all the issues and fears and beliefs that he had, and certainly the way his mind operated, is just like ours. And where he's concerned about, obviously, he was concerned about wolves. He was concerned about getting food on the table, where we, on the other hand, are very, very concerned, less concerned about that kind of survival, physical survival, than we are with social survival. Because we are social animals, just like Otzi was, because that's what's kept us alive, is that we really need the support of others. We can't make it alone. And so today it's fascinating. You guys have covered this so well. You look at the environment is totally different and ever changing. You got this technology pouring down on us. I've polled 2,000 people, and this is not scientific, but it's anecdotal. 2,000 people on what percent of your day at the workplace do you spend either in meetings or doing emails? And it's fascinating. It doesn't matter whether they're Japanese or Germans or Americans or Brits. You come up with the same number of, well, geez, I guess it's about 85% of my day. So think about that. And that gives you, let's say it's roughly true, that gives you about 15% of your day to do leadership stuff, the rest of your job, and to reflect. And that's not enough time to do that. And so you guys have said this, and I believe it deeply, which is what we need to do in the workplace is more and better good leadership But in today's environment, I think you got to square it to really build in that psychological safety and trust and so forth that we need to do.
Mm.
So one of the things that comes out in the book is this disconnect between managers and their people around the real motivations at work that are playing out. Can we talk about that? Understand what you've kind of learned through your experiences of how that works and what you can do to kind of improve that alignment.
And especially on the motivation front, you mean?
Yeah.
I got called into a interesting job one time at Savannah River site, which is one of the 16 U.S. national labs, basically. And they said, we really want to know what our employees are thinking. So I did I'd worked at GE during the golden years in the 90s. So I stole one of Jack Welch's ideas called Quick Win, and I just went down. He called it workout, but I call it Quick Win. So I just went down and had sessions with employees. Say, what is it? What is it that's troubling you? And so the first thing they came up with was we don't have enough communications, and that didn't surprise me because that's number one everywhere. Even good bosses, employees will feel that. And then the second question was. Their second problem they raised was we have too many meetings. So I'm thinking, wait a minute, you need more communications, but you have too few meetings. That's a paradox, isn't it? So I started really intensely interviewing employees, and sometimes actually you do go have a beer to loosen lips about what is it that they really wanted to know. Because when I told it to the lab director, they just started more meetings and they had more information on websites, emails, and so on, and it didn't scratch the itch. So basically it got down to something very human, which is all we want to know is, hey boss, how am I doing? Is our relationship okay? Is there a big purpose here that I'm linked into? Do my colleagues respect? I mean, it's all this truly, truly basic stuff that's unconscious and hidden away, but extraordinarily powerful. And that's an itch that's got to be scratched. And it wasn't being done with emails from the top and pronouncements and talks and all hands meetings and that type of thing. That stuff has got to be addressed. Back to your opening question about feelings, the check-in you did with me, that stuff like that's got to be addressed on one-on-one communications. It could even be idle chit-chat, or it could be following up with questions that like, how are you feeling today? That express concern and so forth. It could be through active listening, all these powerful things we have in our quiver to lead people, but we don't use. So it moved it back to basics, and that's what motivates us. Because if you take the questions I just said and you flip them, you get into intrinsic rewards, which are, far more powerful than the extrinsic. And the intrinsic rewards are, sense of purpose, a sense of autonomy. I've got a little control over my life. It's buy-in. All these things are really what get us cooking, and that's basically how do you really inspire people.
So when you hold the mirror up to people that you've worked with and say, that it's not about communication, it's about addressing core needs of feeling valued, making a contribution, having the ability to influence things and so on. And it requires that deeper touch of, one-on-one relationships. Most of them probably will acknowledge that and then go, I haven't got time to do that. How do you actually break the cycle where they actually see the value of doing that?
That's a good question. Let me go back to the check-ins. And this is something I call habitual process. This is where we have, those of us that do leadership development and training, don't get real high marks for having people graduate and go back to the workplace and apply it. And, part of that reason is they're going back to the cold bath, so it's the culture. Yeah, I get that. Part of the reason is that 85% tie up with meetings and emails. I get that. But I'll tell you what the big thing is habit, habitual behavior of that supervisor. Because, we've all read, at least on the internet or Atomic Habits or something, we read about, okay, what's the key to breaking habit? And I'll tell you, I don't see anything really satisfying there, because I'm looking for a golden key I can turn and I'll start going to the gym. And I just don't see it. And the best you get is advice Mark Twain gave us 160 years ago, which is don't fling habit out the window, take it down the steps one step at a time. It's tiny steps. Mm-hmm. So what happens with leadership training, you get them all fired up on all these things they should do and why they should do it, based on, in my realm, is based on the human mind, how the mind operates. So they've got the why and they've got the techniques, and then they practice them, but they won't do them. So I get back to this this concept I made up of called habitual process. If you think about the check-in, that is a process where you go to your employees and all you're doing is for 5 minutes. You could give them positive feedback. You could ask questions and listen. It's a very quick exchange, but you're doing so many of these little steps that you wanted to teach them in training and you wanted them to apply. So my theory is if you could get them to do check-ins, you're dragging along a lot of good leadership behaviors. So how do you do that? And what I did last month, I worked with a group here in the United States at Department of Homeland Security, a big group. And we developed a program where they're required to do check-ins when they get back. They're schooled on them. They're required to do them. They have to publicly profess to their employees, "Hey guys, just want you to know I learned how to do check-ins at training, and I'm gonna start doing them." Well, there's a big mover toward breaking habit. But here's the real trick. You're not making this bureaucratic, but they're required to simply once a week, 3 bullet point report goes up to a certain person higher up on what did they learn from their check-ins that week. So what you've done there is now you've got the accountability nailed down. And that's what you really need to push the habit. And so we're experimenting with this now. But isn't that's I think, a really powerful idea.
Yeah.
If you grab a process that's got habits embedded and you can really politely push people to do it. Wow.
Yeah, I love that. How does a leader do that at scale? We have listeners all around the world with, leading various different size teams. And so somebody could be listening thinking, I really love this, but my team is massive, right? I just can't see myself being able to do that level of connection with everyone. How might they approach this?
This is going to get into the weird parts of brain functioning to answer this one. But I would, what I look at is obviously at the executive level, you've got a cascade. And how do you do that? Because you're right back in the old spy master seat. I'm pulling levers and nothing's happened. So here's an experiment we did. I did at State Department within the last year. And we transformed a toxic unit. But this is what it involves. The name of my book is Certainty, right? And so my theory is, okay, we cling to the status quo. That's our survival instinct. And then the boss has got this future vision on how are we going to improve operations, or how do we improve quality of life, or whatever. And we basically, as humans, resist change and cling to status quo. But the leaders got to get us over here to a new world. How do they do that? So all that stuff in between is really the important stuff, because leadership is all about getting others to change. If you don't have change or improvement, you can just manage. So I ran into a couple of neuroscientists that were working on the brain's insight mechanism, and it's something I'd never really thought a lot about. And when you have an aha, it is a totally magical moment, because their conjecture was that this is something occurs in not in the prefrontal cortex. In other words, it's not rapid analytical thinking. This has got to be something else. And what they teamed up and what they discovered is a tiny spot above the right ear that literally explodes with energy. So it's like the cartoon with the bulb going on again. Literally explodes, and instantaneously new neuron connections are made. The energy levels of the brain change and so on. But you have to be in a somewhat relaxed state for that to occur, and that doesn't often occur in the workplace. And they've kept working on this and published a book called The Eureka Factor, John Kunos and Dave Beeman. And the fascinating thing was I started talking to Kunos and said, well, what happens inside the brain with chemicals? And he said, well, there's 30-some chemicals sloshing around the brain. He said they combine in a certain way when you have an insight in which you can, which give you, at that moment of that explosion, it gives you a complete sense of certainty. Bingo, that was my magic word, because you're trying to take people to move them to an uncertain environment. So how could you do that and make it a certain environment? And the bottom line is, your ideas are not going to take root, but if it's their idea, wow, that's what's going to happen. So how do you apply that? And not manipulating people, but nicely force them to have insights so that you can get done, Scott, what you just said. The executive can move the organization. So what we did at State was took this unit that was really in bad shape, low morale, and so on, and we had them do what I call leadership reviews, which are, you could do quarterly or every 60 days. I mean, we do budget reviews. Why the heck don't we do leadership reviews? So they're all positive and so forth. But here's what we did. We used what I call an insight prompt, which is, this has been done before, but not at this scale. So we gave each of them a question about, okay, what 1, 2, or 3 things can you do that will transform your workplace or make people's lives better, or get rid of, they had 7 years of backlog in this organization. Can you imagine? Or get rid of the backlog and so forth. And so they were also given 60 days to think about it. And this is critical, because you have to plant the seed, but it can't be spur of the moment. It's not like asking traditional questions. It's mental homework that's got a time lapse. But at the end of it, it's got to have accountability. And the accountability is you're going to come back to the boss and report out. And so they did that. And I was expecting, this is such a battered unit, I was expecting maybe 20% good ideas, and then the rest would be probably pretty mediocre stuff. People just fearful, but they're coming up with stuff. So what happened was about 30% of the ideas were what I would call good ideas. Another 40% were out of the box ideas. And the reason was, these people had been pent up for years, and they're at the work level. They know what needs to be done. They just weren't allowed to do it by an autocratic leader. So there was this explosion. And widely, the manager there is just a super humane turnaround guy. He's natural, great leader. And what he did was he approved every one of those questions or suggestions, and then he just got everybody together and they aligned them up. Okay, what's most critical? what's hardest to do? You do the little matrix, and he made a list or a schedule of priorities, and everybody bought into it, and they're off to the races. So, and I can give you you want two real world examples.
Sure.
And I've talked to John about this, but one time, another CIA story, I'm walking down the hall with a CIA director, and he turned to me and he said, Mike, why is it they're not being more innovative? And I knew he was talking about the employees, because that was his one thing he wanted, to change culture, bring in more innovation. And then he paused and he said, I've already told them in my first 5 speeches I want more creativity. So how would you answer that question? It's both terribly naive, but kind of cosmic at the same time. So luckily we turned off, had to go in the staff room for a meeting. I never had to answer that one. Now, years later, Leon Panetta was holding a meeting when he was CIA director. And this was during the bin Laden days when the hunt was going on for him.
Yeah.
And of course, he had dropped out. He knew we were onto him electronically, so he got rid of everything. There was no traces, no footprints. And so there was a 5 o'clock Wednesday meeting. Panetta had maybe 20 of us in the room, and we talk about other ideas to catch bin Laden and updates and so on. So anyway, Panetta turns to this one hapless case officer and says, so Joe, what do we do here? What new ideas do you have? And Joe went, Chief, I'm sorry, I'm out of ideas, and everybody here's out of ideas. So Panetta flared up, and then he did what good leaders do. He relaxed and he said, look, I'm sorry, I'm not angry at you. I was just angry at the situation. And he said, let's do this. Let's adjourn a meeting, and you come back next week with 10 new ideas to catch bin Laden. Well, that's an insight prompt. He's given them mental homework. The accountability's at the end because they know they've got to come up with 10 new ideas. So what happens is they're now thinking about that question, reflecting on it when they're in the shower, when they're driving to and from work. So next week, the meeting opened, and they came in with 37 new ideas to catch bin Laden. Wow. And that's the power of this. So that's something a CEO can do. And again, you could ask questions, have people address questions like, how do we make this culture better? What can you do to specifically get us to X? Or, all kinds of questions you can ask, and you let them bake where there's in a safe environment where they're free for a week or 2 months to think about it and reflect. They will have some insights, and then you just pull that stuff back. So that's that, and there are a lot of other things too. I think something I call full inclusion or full participation. There's other things that you can do at that level. But
I'd like to come back to the mental prompts in a moment, but I love your suggestions on feedback and how you can avoid the social harm that we inflict on each other through either using the famous, kind of sandwich method or other techniques. Can you explore with us what you've learned about this and how it can hamper progress if we don't get it right?
I heard about a study that they were doing at UCLA on the West Coast in the States on something they call social pain, which is really the strong negative emotions that we experience at times. And psychologists have been working on this. And so if somebody does anything that disturbs your sense of certainty, again, let's go back to that word, you'll have a negative response is visible in the brain on an MRI. So, for example, if there's a change in your autonomy or your control of a situation, that gets spurred. If there's an abrupt change, negative change in relationships with anybody, your spouse, your partner, your whoever, that spurs these negative emotions. If there's something you see extraordinarily unfair, that springs those emotions. So anything, again, it goes kind of back to uncertainty. And so what I saw on one of the experiments was what happens when you basically give somebody negative news, negative feedback, for example. And it was not a pretty picture because the prefrontal cortex just kind of shuts down, turns black, and all those other components of the brain, obviously amygdala, but also it's all connected, they all flare up. And so at that moment, there's no chance for learning, and you've got an individual who's very, very upset. And people are debriefed after these experiments to say what emotion did you see, and some say well, jealousy, some say anger, different emotions that they describe, but it all basically boils down to you didn't get your message across. So some of the most popular methods are the situational method, the sandwich method, which is the good news, bad news, good news. I call that the sewage sandwich. How many times do you do that when the third employee going in knows, oh boy, I'm getting the good news, good news here. The bad news, again, shuts them down. And anytime, for example, if you use past tense and they say, Scott, you came into work late yesterday, and this is what it did to the other employees. That's called the situational behavior method. I have just totally messed up your brain in a negative way because you interpret that, because I use past tense, as blame. So had I used future tense, hey, you know what we could do? We could look at your schedule and see how we can change things, fit your work-life balance, and because if you're here, at 8:00, this means we can do this, and you get this done. You get home earlier. It's just changing something as silly as tenses that affect the brain, and reversing those, and you get much better results. Now, why does that situational method not work? When I accuse you of being late, you were. I'm pointing that out as the anchor. Well, the trouble is, in your mind, you were justified in being late because you had to drop your child off at daycare. You did that, and the lady at daycare wasn't there. She'd gotten a phone call, and so you have to wait to drop your child off, and then you got behind an 18-wheeler truck that broke down. There's reasons, legitimate reasons for your being late in your mind, and the boss is not taking that into account, and so it feels like, hey, you're blaming me when I was totally justified, because we all feel justified in whatever we do, pretty much. So it's just one trick you can use. And I've got, what I'll do, I'll send you guys, I've got 16 tricks like that, but all based on psychology studies that you can use to make giving feedback a lot better. And the one last tip, I've got to say this. If I had my life to live over, I would give more positive feedback. I didn't do it enough. I thought my my B players knew they were good. So why give them positive feedback? So my advice literally to everybody is back to that intrinsic reward discussion we had, is just up your positive feedback eightfold. You ought to look at giving every employee every week one attaboy or attagirl. That would be my goal. And the impact is really interesting. Gallup's looking at that now. I think that the half-life is about a week from a boss giving somebody praise. It decays, obviously, over time. But what you've done is you have reassured them, and you answered all those silly questions with just the positive feedback. Remember the questions of, boss, am I doing a good job? Is there a bigger purpose here? And all of those angsty, unconscious questions go away for a week. And then they start building back up again. You got to start all over.
I love that. Can we come back to the mental prompts you were talking about a moment ago? And you mentioned something about the full inclusion approach, and I've perked my ears up, and I'd love to hear you talk about that.
It's funny. I don't know what to call it. And it's something I learned from Jack Welch, actually. And this was the story flying around GE at the time, which was the union chief at GE was retiring, and of course that the relationship was very testy between the union and management. But they had a retirement dinner. Welch had a retirement dinner for the chief, and it was very cordial and went very well. And at the end, the union chief stood up and gave a really impassioned talk about how much he loved GE, how great the employees were, and how much he appreciated Welch just letting him work there, have that position, and so on. And then right at the end, he looked at Welch and he says, Mr. Welch, you had use of my hands for 34 years. And if you'd only asked, you could have had my brain too.
Wow.
Bam. Talking about getting hit in the middle of the forehead. Yeah. And I think that's where, I don't know, but I think that's where Jack Welch had an aha or an epiphany of, yeah, wait a minute, there's one brain me up here calling all the shots. And I've got this organization of more than 100,000 people. And what if it would happen if I started engaging all those brains? So, and you can't fully engage all the brains all the time. And the reason is, again, that the wear and tear on the human mind, we use up a lot of glucose to concentrate and to think and make decisions. But what I like to see is for leaders, at least every 3 weeks, ensure that they have done that, that they have fully engaged every mind. And the way Welch did it, I mentioned the workout program or the quick win thing, is he would use that, get everybody in a room. Now, here's the requirement. It's not like brainstorming where only the extroverts talk. Everybody has to talk. And they're brainstorming ideas on improvements and so on. So that, I count that as full engagement. Another one is he cleared out the underbrush of bureaucracy at GE. Then he moved on to Six Sigma. And that does the same thing because they found that we can use all these tools and we can solve process problems, but we can't get them implemented. And the solution was we'll bring the employees in as part of the process. They get to work on it. And when they did that, not only did the employees have buy-in, but they came up with better solutions because it was the employees who own and do the process. So again, that's another way of this kind of full inclusion idea. And I think what it does, trust is based on the old law of reciprocity. So it's a gift you're giving somebody when you give them a problem you can't solve, or you're delegating something. I'm not dumping work, but delegating some real kind of thought problem to somebody. That's really a gift. I'm showing you, I trust you to do this. And when you do that enough, obviously you're building up trust between people.
If we zoom out for a moment, because everything we're talking about is set in a very interesting context right now. What's happening in corporate America, what's happening in government, what's happening in the CIA, the certainties that people have had for many years, many decades, are starting to come into question. If you are sitting there advising the most senior people in these organizations about how to navigate that, what's your kind of like top foundational kind of ideas right now in terms of helping people to cope with this upending of our kind of tenets of expectation?
Before I answer that, let me tell you the depths of the problem. I have never seen as much fear in a workforce as the federal workforce in the U.S. And the trouble is, you've got, you remember I talked about social pain, what registers it? Well, if you tell somebody I'm going to do a reorganization, that rings every bell. You're changing relationships, you're questioning their autonomy, you're putting uncertainty into it feels unfair, you're putting uncertainty into the system. So that's one thing they've got going against them. the workforce. And then the second thing is there's also a demonization going on in some areas of the press of government workers. And then thirdly, I think what you're seeing, the model for fixing government is kind of a sledgehammer approach, whereas I think a scalpel would do very nicely. The chiefs of human capital that I've talked to in federal government know who the 5% bad performers are. I mean, they're extremely bad. They can't get rid of them. So just change the rules and laws and let's get rid of the bottom 5% instead of issuing threats and buyouts that haven't been fully thought out to people, and then burning off the people, the best that can go and get jobs outside. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to give you a preface that this is beyond a serious issue, and I've never seen fear in the workplace like that. So I'm going to send you a paper on that I've written up, and it's kind of like samizdat literature in the old Soviet Union. It's just things that a frontline manager can do to start lessening that fear. Now, you're not going to get rid of all of it, because this is such a mega event, but you're going to get rid of some. So I'll shoot you some eight tips, I think that I've worked on that they should do. And the biggest is, just for gosh sakes, the tendency during crises like this for frontline managers is that communications need of employees goes up fivefold. But the trouble is the managers now are in a hole. They don't have the answers to the questions. So their tendency to communicate drops fivefold. So you get this double whammy during crises like this. So what are the answers? Well, the answers aren't at executive level. They're really at the frontline manager level. And the frontline managers are going to have to get out and do one-on-one conversations, very brief. They're going to have the courage to say, I don't know. And if you're an autocratic boss, you think if you say, I don't know, that people won't respect you. And the opposite is true, because you're being honest with people when you say, I don't know what's next. But so build those connections one-on-one. Number 2, reinforce positivity. And that is, for gosh sakes, it takes you 5 seconds to give somebody positive feedback. Do it. And if you don't know what good thing they've done that week, that you can give them positive feedback on them, just ask the question, Juanita, what one thing have you done this week that you're most proud of? She knows. She'll give you the answer because you don't know everything every employee's doing. And then you turn around and you give her a response. Another thing they could be doing is asking motivating questions. Questions are so important, as you guys have pointed out so many times, because they lock the brain in place, and we absolutely focus on a question. So I would ask questions like, what do you enjoy most about work? You get them in a positive frame here. What are your goals for the future? How can I support your professional development here? Or just even, how can I help you? This is pretty basic stuff. So I'll send you a complete list. There's no sense for me yammering on and about it. But the delegation, again, we talked about this full inclusion. That'll give people a charge and something to focus on if it's meaningful delegation. On could be soft issues. How should we improve our culture here, and so forth. Seek their advice genuinely on all the issues that you're tied up as a frontline manager. That's another gift that builds trust. The act of the one-on-one conversation, even if it's just chit-chat, builds psychological safety. So it's just, we're really getting back to the basics we've all talked about, but in fact, it's so crucial to do it right now. And what that'll do is not remove the direct fears, but it's going to so relieve the angst from all those other unknowns of, how am I doing, boss? And it gives people that human contact, which is so crucial. That's going to take some stress away. And that makes the rest of this stuff, the needless change that's going on, it makes it bearable for everybody.
So you mentioned a while back that if you had to do your career over, you would give more positive feedback. And I'm curious, if you were building a business right now, can you give us some of the principles you would use to build a culture that embodies everything that you've been outlining?
I guess because I've done a lot of, way back when I did a lot of startups and so on. And so the great thing is that the founder of a company, or if you were starting a business, you've got the most impact on culture. And basically, I view culture as a summation of how all the managers treated employees over the term of the existence of the organization, with a huge amount or a bigger amount being granted to the person that started up the company. And so, I think I would just go back and pull out this idea of, it's a shortcut, but the idea of certainty. How can I get certainty in everybody's mind? And what that's going to mean is you're going to have a more participative environment, and you're going to do all the stuff that or look at all the things we just talked about. But here's a big one. At CIA, we are very, very worried about narcissists and psychopaths joining the workforce. And it's called the insider threat. And now it's seeped out into the world because cyber people are worried about that. But we don't need a Rick Ames going over to the Russians with all the goodies. And he's, by the way, a star in both those books I'd mentioned. We really are concerned. So the front end assessments are unbelievable. And this stems from a discovery, believe it or not, in 1943 by the OSS. You had the OSS psychologist went to the General Donovan and said, "Chief, we're losing a lot of people when we parachute them in France and so forth to bad leadership. And we think if we leave our Jungian baggage and our Freudian baggage at the door, we're going to be able to assess people that would predict future behavior. It won't be perfect, but it's going to be far better than what we're doing now." So the Brits were doing that too. SIS was working on this, all top secret, and so were the Germans. Well, the Americans were the only one that cracked the code, and then in 1948 published a book called Assessment of Men. Don't try to buy it. It's $3,000 for the original.
Oh, wow.
But what that did is that kicked off the assessment industry. So today you got Gallup, Talent Plus, Connexa, companies like that. And this gets back to the question, are leaders born or made? And of course it's both, but some people have higher leadership aptitude than others. And you've probably worked for it. When I asked the assessment companies, and I've asked several, what percent of the people that you assess for leadership skills, and that's stuff like they've got drive, empathy, their positivity, that they've got the whole package. I said, what percent of the people that you assess would you call natural leaders? And the answer is about 8%. So what you want to do is, on starting up a company, or long-winded answer to your problem, but the first thing I would do is I would make sure I up my selection validity, and I could, with the managers I'm hiring that are going to lead my people. And when you do that, it's not just you and me as laymen interviewing people. That's got pretty low coefficient of validity, but it's stuff like the psychological assessments. It's professionally done behavioral interviews, backward looking, behaviorally based, OJT, things that have more validity. And even a little bit improvement on your selection validity is unbelievable impact on an organization. And you can look at Ritz-Carlton, for example. They give assessments to everybody, and they put people in the right place, exactly the right place where their talents can be used the most. And here's a cool story. They give assessments, like I say, to everybody. And they discovered a woman who was a maid in housekeeping, and her leadership aptitude was off the chart. So what did they do? Well, they thank goodness they didn't just throw her in a leadership position, and they didn't even start giving her training, but they got her a coach, and they started working with this woman. And today, she's a senior VP at Ritz-Carlton. Now, that's pretty cool. So to find this talent and unleash human beings, start with those managers on the selection side and get the validity up so that they're going to treat the people right. And that way, in answer to your previous question about what does the executive do, I mean, that would be the first step. Because in my work I've done, look, if you've got more than 20% poor and awful bosses, as measured by the employees, you've got serious problems in an organization. It really starts to lug. So you want to get that number down as low as you can, 6%, 5%, and an organization can fly.
So we're coming to the end of our time, and I'd love to step into the metaphorical elevator. And someone says, oh my goodness, you're Mike Mears. Can you give me one lesson about being a great leader that I should really take on board? What would that single lesson be, do you think?
Wow. Again, I think what it is leadership is so simple, but there's so many pieces that it's got a forgettable simplicity. And that's why I've been trying to, how do you boil it down? And you guys have done a good job. So in my book, I would say, hey, Mrs. Manager, Mr. Manager, type out the word certainty and cut it off and then put Scotch tape on it and tape it to your bathroom mirror. And every day, when you're brushing your teeth, think, okay, so how am I today going to bring certainty in people's brains? And I think the biggest single thing people can do is to take 20 minutes a week, and it could be over coffee Saturday morning, and think through how am I going to inspire my people this week? How am I going to find out what they're thinking? Who am I going to give praise to? How am I going to do my check-ins? Just to stop, get out of that automatic brain, and actually concentrate and think about a plan of what you're going to do. And again, it doesn't take that long, but that would be the most important 20 or 30 minutes of your week to think it through. Now you can go do it.
Love that.
Gosh, this is such a rich conversation. I wish we could keep going because I feel like we've just scratched the surface, and you've given us so much to take away, so much practical insights and so much benefits of your wisdom. And we're really, really grateful for your time.
Well, thank you too for doing what you're doing. I'm telling you this, I want to give you a plug. This is the most amazing bank of podcasts I've ever seen anywhere. I mean, it is so rich and broad and at a high level. It's not platitudinal. So I salute you guys too.
Oh, thank you, Mike. That's very good, very kind of you.
Yes. And dear listener, thank you for being with us for this conversation. And until next time, remember, the world is evolving. Are you?